After decades of isolation, Myanmar has emerged slowly into the modern world. Precariously balanced between past and present, it floats on the currents of a new day. To journey here is to step back in time to a world of mystery and beauty. A land as hard and as lovely as its symbol, the ruby. Nestled between India and China, Myanmar, as Burma is now called, has the largest ruby mines in the world. They are tucked far away in the hinterlands. To reach them, we travel first to Yangon, the capital. The harbor is the gateway to the outside world. But in the streets of Yangon, there beats the heart of the country. Pagodas, monks, believers, and above all, rubies. The ruby dealers meet in Sway Bon Ta Street. Deals are made over a cup of tea in one of the many little sidewalk tea shops. An illegal market, but one that is tolerated. Still, nobody likes to be watched when showing the little red jewels. Tea and rubies. Both have a long tradition here. 100 years ago, it was the Maharajahs who sold their rare gems to the Europeans. Today, the military controls the state ruby mines, and the country too. With Captain Kin Ng Zhao, we are about to undertake an incredible journey deep into the heart of an area that has long been closed to foreigners. A military zone, still top security. We set off from Tung Gi and travel into the notorious Golden Triangle, perhaps the most infamous drug-growing region on Earth. Heading to Mong Shu on the mountain Loi Sok Tok, we will be the first foreign team to film in one of the largest and most dangerous ruby mining areas in the world.
Mong Shu, it was found out last 4 years ago, and still the area is not very secure, and then that's why you are the first person to get there as a foreigner.
The area around Mong Shu achieved notoriety as the territory of the warlord and drug kingpin Kun Sa, who battled the Burmese government and its forces for years. Assembling his own army, Kun Sa vowed to lead the Shan, one of Myanmar's ethnic tribes, to independence and prosperity. In return, the Shan would plant his opium in their fields. Today, after years of civil war, the peasants are as poor as ever. As for Kun Sa, he dissolved his army and disappeared, a rich man. Nowadays, there is a fragile peace in this troubled spot. Over 30,000 soldiers are still stationed east of Tung Gi. For security reasons, they say, but security is hard to find in the Golden Triangle. We too are given an escort of 60 soldiers. The soldiers are changed at every stage of the journey. We are announced and handed on from village to village. There is much talk of bandits and thieves and other scoundrels lurking on this road. The worst enemy, however, is the road itself. When we set off from Tung Gi, a journey of 170 miles lay ahead of us. But the deeper we penetrate into the military area, the more frequent the breakdowns. The mine on the mountain seems close enough to touch, but once again, our jeep is stuck in the mud. This time, it looks bad. Captain Zhao seems worried. Will we have to turn back? Spend the night in the middle of nowhere? But more and more helpers turn up. For when we get stuck, the cars behind us also come to a halt. Our escort becomes a towing service, a well-armed one. The monsoon season, though nearly over, is still wearing away the muddy track. We slog ahead another half-mile, and then, finally, come to a dead halt. The last half-mile will have to be covered on foot. This is the end of the world. Or it was, until the first Shan families discovered rubies.
It was found by some native people, but they don't know it's a precious stone, and they sell it out to some Chinese merchant at very cheap rate. And then this new come and spread out, and then many people go there, and it's become like a ruby rush.
We arrive just before dusk in Loy Sok Tok. It's taken us 2 full days to cover 170 miles. Long after nightfall, we hear the distant sounds of the pumps and generators. Yet the mine is nowhere in sight. We are deep in the mountain jungle of Myanmar, deep in the heart of the country. Peace descends upon the valley. We almost forget the mine. But dawn comes up like thunder in Myanmar. The next morning, we are awakened by dynamite blasting. On Loy Sok Tok, the hunt for rubies never stops. "50,000 people live on this mountain, and for most of them, life is restricted to a few square yards, the area they work in the mine. They leave the open air behind and head into the depths, 190 feet down the narrow shafts. Making their way down slippery bamboo ladders, they disappear day after day into one of the passages of the labyrinth, sometimes forever. There is talk of accidents where up to 70 people were buried. While the technology is not modern, work at this mine does follow a system. The rubies must be lured from the mountain, the gems separated from the rock, and so a great human machine has been assembled. The rubble released by the blasting is carried away piece by piece and dumped out onto the waste pile. Hundreds of times a day, the men carry the rocks down the muddy steps. In rain and heat, they march in single file to unload their stones. The dirt that might actually contain rubies is shoveled into sacks, tied up, and passed along a human conveyor belt of several hundred yards. Again and again, day in and day out, the same motions send the sacks down the line to the first sorting station. Here they will be examined for the first time. In large sorting pens, the stone is separated from the dirt. The hunt for the ruby is conducted in foot-high sludge, under the unblinking eyes of the foreman. Washing down the dirt, the men cull the stones from the mud. In this process, water is precious. Every drop is cleaned and recycled, not with machines, but with human labor. Life in the mines may seem harsh, but Myanmar is one of the 10 poorest countries on earth. And here at Loy Sok Tok, each worker actually earns double the national wage, 4,000 jets, about $40. For this, workers come from all across the country. The hunt for treasures moves mountains and homes. Until 1992, the bamboo huts of the Shan mountain tribes stood here. Now, there is an ever-expanding lake. How many tons of earth have been turned over in search of the ruby? No one has counted. But the work never stops, and the cycle is never broken. The sorted material goes into the sacks. The sacks are collected and passed on once again. Next stop is the lift, which will take the pre-sorted stone to its final sorting in the tent at the entrance to the mine. Down below, over 200 sorters are at work, looking for rough stones. They toss and turn their sieves of gravel and dump them out onto the tables nearby. Their job, in a sea of brown, to find anything that glitters red. No one speaks. They stare at the gravel before them, searching, sorting. The waste pile at their feet grows. For hours on end, they stand on sharp stones and splinters, motionless, always in the same position. They sort with one hand, the left hand folded behind the back. Temptation is great. So the sorters are changed every 6 months. Only the foremen remain, and they never take their eyes off the sorters' hands. They control the workers and their work, often discovering small ruby slivers swept almost carelessly onto the floor. Hard as it may be to imagine, precious gems worth millions of dollars see the light of day here every month. Of course, the workers dream of sharing in this wealth, but between their dreams and the reality, there is a large gulf. They live under the most extreme conditions. The free board and lodging they get from the mine owners mean, for most of them, little more than a tarpaulin, a camp bed, a hovel in the midst of dirt and noise. Only when the oil simmers in the wok does the atmosphere mellow. But there is an unwritten law in the camp. The military is prepared to turn a blind eye on the occasional smuggled ruby as long as the lion's share remains untouched. They know that a few smuggled rubies arouse dreams in the miners which keep them going in their hard labor. And it is this dream which breathes life and color into Loy Sok Tok, which attracts the ragtag crowd of ruby merchants and wheeler dealers who have settled at the entrance to the mine. When the workers leave the mine in the evening, the dealers are waiting for them. Meal stones are at issue here, small stones sold to supply a family's basic needs. This deal was not clinched. But not far away, another exchange meets with success. For ordinary people in the ruby business, everyday life is measured in the stones they hold. Children rummage at the women's feet, searching the ground for tiny ruby splinters. Farther down the road are the shacks of the more successful dealers. Their transactions with rubies are legal as long as both trading partners pay the 10% tax demanded by the military. How many actually pay the tax? How many stones pass through here? No one can say. These deals are clinched in the back rooms. There, too, are the small grinding shops, where, in the dim light, the ruby receives its final touches. It is mostly the small rubies that are processed here, tiny stones so fine only a practiced artisan could work with them. On the Ruby Mountain, business is booming. There are gemstones enough for everyone. However, most of the profit does not flow through the shacks and the back rooms of Loy Sok Tok. It comes here. The military has its own experts who sort the stones according to quality and size. On the table is the daily yield from 6 state mines. Mr. Ko Mo Win, a sorter, explains the collection process.
Every sorted parcel is deposited in the safe until there are enough to be sent to Yangon. That's at least once a month, sometimes twice.
We ask about the bundle he's holding right now.
Okay, so, not good, not bad.
This enigmatic response might conceal almost anything, even wonderful 4-carat rubies like these, worth $40,000 apiece. How are these precious rubies taken out of Loy Sok Tok? By helicopter?
No. We always send the rubies to Yangon with an escort. accompanied by bodyguards, as it were. The stones are usually taken to Yangon in 5 or 6 army buses. This load here will be escorted by 3 or 4 cars.
Ruby transport as a military operation. The valuable cargo is in heavily armed hands. But here, there are always risks. The road is treacherous, and our convoy hits trouble. 2 soldiers are injured in the accident, and the Ruby caravan grinds to a halt. The munitions are collected, the next camp informed of the incident by radio, and then the work begins. Anyone who sets off for the Ruby Mountain reckons with the worst. The route always seems to take its toll. After a journey of 20 hours, we reach Tungui again. This quiet little town is only 170 miles from the mines, but it is worlds apart. Here, civilization rules again. The Ruby Market in Tungui is the meeting place for the buyers who do not wish to dirty their hands in the mud of Mengshu. Most of them buy stones here in grand style and take them just across the border to Thailand. For a mere 500 miles away lies the center of the international ruby market, Bangkok. The International Jewelry Trade Center has a daily turnover which Myanmar could only dream about. The biggest jewelers in the Asian world have settled here in Bangkok. They present the rubies in glitter and splendor, as the world knows them, under glass. These are rare and sparkling treasures, precious jewels, symbols of power, wealth, and eternal youth. And yet, it seems fitting that these gemstones are blood red, the red of life and suffering. It is a strange irony that these incredible riches were born in the mud of one of the poorest countries on earth. A country where, in the sludge of daily existence, faith glitters like a gem, where beauty and adversity are both facts of life, here in the land of the ruby.
The morning of August the 24th, AD 79, dawned bright and clear over the Roman cities that dotted the lush hills around the Bay of Naples. In the villas of Pompeii, citizens of a great empire slept serenely, unsuspecting. The elegant public baths were quiet. In the suburb of Oplontis, a young woman of some means slipped on her rings and went about her business. Strolling the sleepy, cobbled streets, an early riser may have cast a glance at the summit of Mount Vesuvius to the north and noticed a thin column of rising smoke, paying it little heed. But at the foot of the mountain, a woman awoke to find the dawn darkened by ash and sent a servant off to ask for help. By the time the note reached its destination, it would be too late. Modern-day catastrophes like these have taken a terrible toll, but have also proved a boon to scientists struggling to understand the last hellish hours of Pompeii. Already the ash was coming down, wrote Pliny the Younger about the events of AD 79. One could hear the moans of women, the cries of babies, the screaming of men. Many lifted up their arms to the gods. Even greater numbers affirmed that there were no longer any gods, and that this was the last night of the world. For the cities in the shadow of Vesuvius, the last night of the world lasted for 15 centuries. So completely did Vesuvius obliterate Pompeii and her neighbors of Herculaneum, Stabae, and Oplontis, that the memory of where the cities had been was soon forgotten. By the Middle Ages, only a faint echo survived in the local folklore. The area south of Vesuvius was called La Civita, or the city, even though no city remained. Then, in the late 1500s, tunnel diggers ran across ancient inscriptions and walls in the ash. But it was not until 1748 that excavations began in earnest. The science of archaeology grew up here. What began as a race to collect classical art treasures for royal houses matured into a painstaking study of an ancient culture. Much of what has been found here is known the world over. Its grand public places, elegant villas, stunning mosaics, and lavish bathhouses richly encapsulate what is known of the life of leisure in ancient Roman times. As do its exuberant self-portraits of sensual excess. In stark contrast to the art and architecture are the equally famous final agonies of those entombed in Vesuvian ash. In the 1860s, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli recognized that many of the human remains being excavated were found in hollows, which he thought might actually contain the outlines of the victims. He pumped plaster into one of the hollows to create a cast, and the results astonished the world. Pompeii's ghoulish statues of death fascinate us as much today as when they first emerged from the ashes some 130 years ago. But they remained largely curiosities, as have the hundreds of discarded skeletons. Only now are the dead of Pompeii undergoing scientific analysis, and only now is science coming to grips with the full extent of the horrors they endured. Almost 2,000 years too late to help her, and thousands of miles from home, the Lady of Oplontis makes news by undergoing high-tech medical scans at the University of Sydney in Australia. Named for the suburb of Pompeii where she was discovered in 1984, the Lady of Oplontis became a test case for a new type of casting. Instead of plaster, which shrinks and bubbles while drying, the archaeologist used resin. Resin also has the advantage of being transparent, so the archaeologist can visually inspect the bones and the few possessions the lady clutched as she tried to flee through the falling ash. A jeweled bracelet and a purse. Her caretaker is archaeologist and anatomist Estelle Laser.
What we're looking at here is an X-ray of the cast. And apart from the bones, you can also see that she was carrying a purse with various valuables in it, including some coins. And on her arm, you can see that she had a bracelet. From the bones, we can establish various things about her. One is that we are in fact looking at a female, and the best bone for indicating this is the pelvis. This angle here is a very good indicator that we have got a female. Various other features on the bone enable us to determine that she was probably between 30 and 35 years of age when she died.
The Lady of Aplantis was also CAT scanned. The technology provides what is essentially a cross-section of the skeleton in its resin cast. These detailed medical records of the lady will serve as a baseline for Laser, who is systematically studying the bones of the Pompeii dead. Beneath the streets of Pompeii, dark catacombs are strewn with chaotic rubble. Look closely, and the rubble resolves itself into bones, guaranteed to instill despair in most anatomists. Look closer, and the futility of ever assembling them into skeletons becomes clear.
Pompeii is a particular challenge to our archaeologists studying bones because the skeletons weren't collected systematically over the first 150 years of excavation. They were really just collected for their grotesque sort of imagery, and they were stored in places like the Cenobaths where we are now. And they were stored in huge piles, and they became completely disarticulated.
Because she has scattered bones instead of skeletons, she must study them en masse, using statistics. Under mathematical scrutiny, piles of left and right leg bones, left and right pelvises, and rows of skulls yield a picture of the average Pompeian. The popular view of the eruption of Vesuvius is that it struck down the young, the wealthy, and the cosmopolitan from all corners of the Roman world as they cavorted in their getaway by the bay. But statistical analysis of the piles of bones has yielded a very different picture.
Up until fairly recently, well, this study, in fact, there'd been no systematic study of the human skeletal remains in Pompeii. But people had written a lot about the population of Pompeii. They'd always assumed that it was a heterogeneous, that is, a mixed population, because Pompeii was a river port. And they'd always assumed that the people who became victims were the old, the infirm, the very young, and women. And this is the first time we could actually test this information.
Laser has found a large number of genetic traits in these bones that suggest that the population was not cosmopolitan, but rather made up of fairly closely related people. The skulls frequently have an extra bone, and the canine teeth often have two roots instead of the usual one. Another likely genetic link can be found on the insides of the skulls. About 10% of them show benign tumors, whereas a normal skull is smooth inside. This is the signature of a syndrome called hyperostosis frontalis interna, or HFI. And it is this finding that brought Laser's work an unexpected reception.
It's associated with usually postmenopausal women, and there are a number of signs and symptoms that come with it, and they vary a bit, but generally there's a tendency towards obesity, so women become very fat, and they become quite hairy. They tend to grow beards. The Italian press completely went to town and wrote huge articles about whether the women of Pompeii were fat and hairy and ugly, and there have been incredible academic discourses about whether the women were in fact not good looking, and the argument against my work's generally been that the paintings on the wall show beautiful young women.
But for Laser, such reaction is missing the point. The large number of bones of postmenopausal women defies conventional wisdom about the lifespan of ancient Romans.
the Pompeians were probably leading a normal lifespan. If they survived that critical period of high infant mortality, I think they probably survived to a lifespan that was comparable to a modern Western one.
Another grimmer scenario might explain the high number of older people in Laser's sample, as she readily admits. They may have been the ones left behind when Vesuvius unleashed its fury on Pompeii. In AD 79, Vesuvius did not erupt completely without warning, as has often been portrayed. 17 years earlier, a violent earthquake shook the area, and sporadic smaller quakes probably occurred more and more frequently as the fatal day arrived. In the days before the eruption, wells and springs ran dry. Those with the means, the resort population, may have packed up and gone to their safer primary residence. Those without the means, the poorer, more homogeneous group, probably remained behind. There is also evidence that some of the grand villas may have been abandoned by their owners and taken over by squatters. In several, agricultural implements had been hung over the grand wall paintings. August the 24th, AD 79. Across the bay at Misenum, 17-year-old Pliny the Younger and his uncle had just finished lunch when they noticed something strange over Vesuvius. Its general appearance can best be expressed as being like an umbrella pine, for it rose to a great height on a sort of trunk and then split off into branches, wrote the 17-year-old Pliny, whose account would go down in history as the first eyewitness report of a volcanic eruption. To those of us in the 20th century, the Italian umbrella pine is eerily suggestive of something unimaginable to the Pompeians. The mushroom cloud, icon of enormous power and signature of the atomic age. In fact, the study of nuclear explosions has helped geologists decipher the physics of the explosive eruptions, such as the one at Mount St. Helens in 1980. These eruptions, in turn, have helped animate Pliny's account of Vesuvius for volcanologists, like Haraldur Sigurdsson of the University of Rhode Island.
The main eruption, which began just after noon on the 24th of August, was a very large explosive eruption and sent out a column of ash and pumice to a great height in the atmosphere, probably up to about 20 miles. And this ash plume up into the atmosphere then was dispersed by the wind, carried to the south and southeast, right over Pompeii.
In Misenum, Pliny's uncle had already decided to take a closer look when a panicky message arrived from a lady friend at the foot of Vesuvius. Pliny the Elder, a man of gallantry and with an encyclopedic knowledge of natural history, was also an admiral of the Roman fleet. Their scientific excursion turning into a rescue operation, both Plinies bravely set off across the bay by ship. Only one of them would return. The rain of pumice and ash accumulated on the streets of Pompeii at the rate of about a foot every 2 hours. It was not in itself deadly, but by evening it had crushed most of the roofs in the city. Help was no longer on the way. The ashfall forced Pliny's rescue mission to head south to help those at Stabai instead. The Pompeians fled from their collapsing homes into the streets, not knowing that the worst was yet to come. Only in the last decade has science come to grips with the most deadly phase of an explosive eruption, the surge. Based on a discovery made during nuclear testing in the 1940s, volcanologists learned that hot, ground-hugging clouds race away from an explosive eruption blowing apart and incinerating anything in their paths. Surges leave little trace of themselves in the geological record, but are far deadlier than the more evident pumice falls and lava flows. For the people of Pompeii, they came at the witching hour.
And then around midnight, the style of the activity changed dramatically, and instead of a very high column, now the volcano was producing a fountain of ash and pumice. And this fountain rose up and then collapsed on the flanks of the volcano and raced away as a glowing avalanche of hot ash, traveling at about 100 miles per hour, and temperature high enough to carbonize wood. This ash flow is very similar to what we saw in Mount St. Helens in 1980.
No fewer than 6 of these glowing avalanches raced away from Vesuvius over the next few hours, as the mountain repeatedly exploded and collapsed on itself. The first of these incinerated everyone in Herculaneum, a town some 2.5 miles closer to the foot of the mountain. The third reached the north wall of Pompeii, which saved the remaining Pompeians, for the moment. But in the suburbs to the north, the Lady of Oplontis was not so lucky. She and dozens of others were overcome as they took shelter from the onslaught. Thanks to the lessons learned at Mount St. Helens, we now have a clear understanding of her last frantic minutes. The eruption at Mount St. Helens claimed 69 lives. They are the only victims of an explosive volcanic eruption to be studied by physicians and forensic specialists. The results, along with new findings about the hot gas avalanches created in such explosions, give the last moments of Pompeii a truly nightmarish quality.
Immediately, the inside of your lungs are burnt, and there is no oxygen or little oxygen in the air. And furthermore, you inhale a lot of ash particles or dust that immediately chokes up the windpipes, and suffocation occurs very, very quickly, or certainly within a minute or two. Besides, that person is suffering skin burns all over the body because of the very high temperature of the ash. So it is a horrible, agonizing death. Fortunately, only lasts for maybe a couple of minutes.
From the expression on her face, the Lady of Oplontis may indeed have choked to death. But her positioning also suggests that she suffered thermal shock or baking, as found in several of the victims of St. Helens.
Right, well, this is very typical of bodies that have been exposed to extremely high temperatures. In the literature, they suggest between 200 and 250 degrees Celsius will cause this almost like a boxer's pose, where you get the arms flexed and the legs flexed and the spine extended. This is quite common with a lot of eruptions where you have these volcanic surges.
About an hour after the lady's unfortunate end, Vesuvius claimed another victim. On the beach at Stabai, the stout-hearted old naturalist Pliny the Elder collapsed from the fumes and died. At about the same time, a fourth glowing avalanche blasted over the north wall into Pompeii at about 200 miles an hour and up to 400 degrees Celsius. In the end, the remarkable human figures and skeletons of Pompeii may represent only a fraction of the toll claimed by Vesuvius, and many more may await the archaeologist's spades. For years, excavations at the nearby city of Herculaneum suggested that it had been abandoned long before the eruption. Only 10 human skeletons had been found. But that changed dramatically in 1982.
We were involved with excavations on the waterfront or on the beach in Herculaneum, and we found that hundreds of skeletons, hundreds of human remains were on the beach, and the people had actually managed to escape and get out of the city, but they were caught between the ocean and the volcano. Similarly, in Pompeii, I think that not a very large number of human remains have been found in the city, and this has led to the view that the city had been largely evacuated, Well, I think that's probably correct, but my suspicion is that we will find with future excavations that a very large proportion of the population is buried under the volcanic deposits just south of the city, which is an area that has never been excavated.
Giuseppe Rossellino, survivor of the small 1944 eruption, reminds us that nothing is certain about Pompeii.
It was a giant. It was picturesque when it was smoking. Since then, it's extinguished. It has finished its cigars. The 18th of March, it will have been 51 years that it hasn't smoked anymore. Until this moment. But who knows?
Volcanologists are reassuring. Vesuvius tends to erupt violently at roughly 700-year intervals. That gives archaeologists another couple of centuries to dig up whatever secrets are still buried under its ancient ash. One remarkable testament to the lives of a doomed people are the graffiti found all over Pompeii. Thousands of personal messages scratched on plaster walls. They're filled with curses and praises for politicians, athletes, and friends, as well as advice on everything from love to table manners. The Pompeians gave vent to both love and hatred with equal exuberance. One wrote, "O Chius, I hope that your ulcerous pustules reopen and burn more than they did before." Another scratched, "He who loves should live. He who knows not how to love should die. And he who obstructs love should die twice." And of course, one prescient Pompeian wrote, "Nothing lasts forever."